Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for the launch of the 5th issue of Blue Security's Maritime Affairs, Assessing Southeast Asia's Maritime Governance Priorities. I'm Kate Clayton, Senior Coordinator for Programs and Research at Trobe Asia and Blue Security. Before we begin, Blue Security and Trobe Asia would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung and Barong Boon Wurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here with us today. The Blue Security program engages with and facilitates high-quality research on issues of critical maritime security across the Indo-Pacific. It brings together leading regional experts on politics, international law, strategic studies, focusing on 3 key pillars of maritime security, order, law, and power. This 5th edition of Maritime Affairs was the culmination of a series of workshops Blue Security ran in Singapore May last year, which aimed to assess the maritime governance capacity in Southeast Asia. Attending the workshop were 7 early career researchers from Southeast Asia who then formed the authors of our 5th edition. This includes Thu Nguyen Hoang Anh, Ganadillo, Fikry A, Rahman, Chansambath BONG, Tengu Chiril, Tita, Sanglee, and Xian Hong. The ECRs were mentored by regional experts, including John Bradford, Bec Strating, Peter Dean, Troy Lee Brown, Blake Herzinger, and Tara Davenport. ECRs participated in and attended a roundtable on maritime security challenges in Southeast Asia at the National University of Singapore's Centre for International Law, which was in collaboration with Blue Security. The ECR workshops strengthen and support regional research collaboration among next-generation maritime scholars, creating a network of maritime security scholars between Australia and Southeast Asia. The papers in this edition of Maritime Affairs were also published online with the Centre for Strategic and International Studies Asian Maritime Transparency Initiative. So joining us today, we have 3 early and rising stars of maritime security, Thu Nguyen Hoang Anh, Ganadillo, as well as Fikry A. Rahman. So Thu is pursuing a PhD in public policy at the National University of Singapore, and she's also a member of the Young Leaders Forum at Pacific Forum. She holds an MA in Transnational Governments from the European University Institute, as well as a BA in International Relations from Tokyo University. Previously, she was an intern at the Fisheries and Aquaculture Unit, Organisation and Economic Cooperation and the Development, OECD, and her research interests include international relations of the Asia-Pacific, maritime security, and public policy. Ganadillo is an international relations PhD candidate at Ewha Women's University in Seoul, and her academic career includes lecturing at Ateneo de Manila University and Polytechnic University of the Philippines. Beyond academia, she has enriched her profile through practical experience, including serving as a consultant and defense analyst for the Philippines Navy Office of Naval Strategic Studies, and she's contributed significantly as a research associate and extension specialist at the University of Philippines. Dillman. Ivy's also engaged in research concerning, of course, maritime security, as well as Philippines-China security relations and larger security dynamics of East Asia. Finally, joining us, we have Fikry A. Rahman, who's the head of foreign affairs at Bach Al Amna, a political and development research institute based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. His research interests include Chinese digital connectivity in Southeast Asia, maritime security and governance, and Malaysia's foreign policy and domestic politics. Among the research projects that he's involved in are the Princeton University's Chinese Belt and Road Initiative projects in Southeast Asia and Peace Research Institute Oslo's Southeast Asian countries cooperation with Chinese digital connectivity. His insights have also been featured in the Diplomat, Pacific Forum, and the New Straits Times. So safe to say we have a fantastic group among us to talk about security challenges in Southeast Asia concerning maritime governments. So we'll begin with Thu. So I was wondering if you could outline maritime governance priorities and challenges of Vietnam, which you talk about in your paper.
Sure. Thanks, Kate, for the questions. And first of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be a part of these publications and great to see all of you today. So I think Vietnam has several priorities when it comes to maritime governance, but the most important ones is definitely protecting the sovereignties, addressing maritime dispute, and also maintaining the freedoms of navigations and freedoms of overflight. But Vietnam, like any other countries, apart from securities, also concerns about economic growth. And the central government has been promoting for the effective use of marine resources for the development of the economies. So just to introduce you about the context, Vietnam has a relatively long coastline with rich marine resources of high economic values, such as fish, shrimp, seaweed, etc. And these marine resources can potentially drive the economies of Vietnam. But I think the priorities of economic growth can risk the environmental deteriorations. And because of this, in recent years, I can see the government has been promoting the blue economy concept, and they also try to maintain a harmony between the economic developments and also marine protections. So beyond that, I think the Vietnamese governments also prioritize maritime cooperations with many regional and also international partners, because now we live in a globalized world and we also face with many wicked problems. So I think no countries alone, including Vietnam, can solve these transnational issues alone. And the last priority that I can identify is probably the safety and also the prosperity of the coastal communities, because actually more than half of the Vietnam's population stays in the coastal areas. So these are the challenges, are the priorities. And now I would like to talk about the challenges. So I will divide it into traditional and non-traditional maritime security challenges. In terms of traditional maritime security challenges, I think an example is the South China Sea dispute. And by now, I think all of us are aware of how complicated and contested these disputes are. And Vietnam is currently involved in the dispute over the Paracel and the Spratleys Islands, along with other 5 countries, China, Taiwan, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei. And apart from the traditional security issues, Vietnam also faced with many non-traditional security issues, such as IUU fishing, sea level rise, or also marine plastic pollutions. Let's take the IUU fishing as an example. So actually the issue is still ongoing, and there are many cases of Vietnamese vessels engaging in IUU fishing practices and entering foreign waters without proper permissions. And notably in 2017, Vietnam was also received a yellow card from the European Commission due to its inadequate effort to tackle these issues. So I can see improvements have been made since 2017, but the yellow card is still in effect up to now. So that is my answer for your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that one too. You really outlined the interconnected nature of the more traditional and boundary issues that the region faces, such as the South China Seas, but also how it's connected to these more non-traditional issues like IUU fishing. And if anyone else is interested on Vietnam and the yellow card, I'd recommend reading some of Thu's work. She's written quite prolifically on this issue. So now we'll hand over to you, Fikry, if you could outline Malaysia's maritime governance priorities as well as challenges.
Thanks very much, Kate. Thanks for having me and with a terrific lineup of scholars and for today's event. So I think first of all, before I start on the maritime governance of Malaysia, I think recently Malaysian maritime security has been experienced a tragedy which involved the life of 10 great officers from Royal Military Navy. So deepest condolences to the officers and to the families. So they are great officers, and when we talk about maritime governance, it involves not only on the overall governance, but also it involves the livelihood of the officer itself. So when we talk about maritime governance of Malaysia, I think it underpins by at least two blueprints. First, in national security policy that provides a core value on territorial sovereignty and integrity, and also underpinned by the Defence White Paper 2022, which pointed out as Malaysia as a maritime nation with continental roots. So it aims to bridge between the Pacific and Indian Oceans. So it means that Malaysia's maritime governance is not only on security, but its overall role in connecting the region itself. So when it comes to priorities, Malaysia has been prioritized at least 4 areas. First is on to safeguard their territorial integrity and sovereign rights. It is through legal instruments as under UNCLOS, and Malaysia has been using that in 2002 on Sipadan Digitan case with Indonesia, and also CLCS submission on extended continental shelf in 2009, this joint submission with Vietnam. In 2019, it's a sole submissions. So this is the first priorities. Second one is to keep the diplomatic channels open. This is through Malaysia's continuous efforts on the COC negotiation. I think now we got a second readings for that. So Malaysia continuously is a strong proponent for the COC to be concluded, or at least to be continue to be negotiated in order for a safe and stable South China Seas. And then Malaysia continues to use the protest note when it comes to any assertive behavior or encroachment in the sea. So Malaysia has launched lots of protest notes, especially towards the Chinese government. And then next, the third one is on to establish a credible defense partnerships with the US, the UK, and Australia, and even China. Even when we got some issues with China, we still have a partnership with China on including a military procurement in the South China Sea on the LMS ships. And then finally, to strengthen national capacity on interagency cooperation, it is not only involved the armed forces, but also includes maritime nation enforcement agencies, ESCOM, bodies that are engaging in the East Malaysia, and also the National Security Council. All the agencies has been worked closely, and it is a priority for Malaysian government to strengthen their cooperation for the maritime governance capacity. So based on the priorities, it evolves surrounding to contend with the challenges that we had. First, challenges is on the maritime dispute. So maritime dispute, it is between Kalimantan states, for example, with Indonesia on Sulawesi Sea, and Louisiana Reef with Brunei, although it's a bit dormant nowadays. And then another challenges, I think, has been less discussed, but still priorities on the when it comes to challenges is on the Philippines dormant claim over Sabah. So there's been debate still ongoing. I think the senator from the Philippines has been tried to bring this during the discussions. This is the first challenge on the maritime dispute. Second challenge is on the Chinese assertiveness. So although nowadays the issues has been slowly underdeveloped, there's not much as compared to before. In 2020, we have the West Capella standoff. On 2021, we got PLA jet incursions near Sarawak waters. Nowadays, we did not see that, but still there's a reports. Have been reports saying that there's some sighting of the Chinese vessel, and I think recently there's been some videos been showing in Twitter, formerly known as X. There's videos, the South Luconia Shoals, Chinese vessels has been stay idle in that. And then after that, MINDEF has been made a statements saying that we will patrol that areas. So saying that there's still issues on the encroachment and also assertive behavior in the areas. And then finally, I think this is on non-traditional security. I think all countries have been facing a similar problems. And for Malaysia, for IUU fishings, or the leakages, we can annually, the leakages is around 1 billion USD, which is a lot for Malaysia. And then this is one of the challenges that Malaysia needs to face. And also in Sabah, in East Sabah, we can see that there's lots of cross-border issues that kidnap for ransom, terrorism still ongoing, and it's really impacted overall East Malaysia security and national interest in that area. So this is how Malaysia's prioritized our maritime governance to correspond with the challenges that we had in the South China Sea, and also in the overall maritime domains. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that one, Fikry. I think your remarks really highlighted, as you said, the kind of interagency and whole of government approach that maritime government entails. It looks at things like laws, regulations, policies, institutions, both at the domestic level, like you highlighted, but also at the international and regional level. So when we're thinking of things like code of conduct, negotiations. So Ivy, we'll turn to you now to look at the maritime governance priorities and challenges of the Philippines.
All right, thank you, Kate. So, and of course, good day to everyone. And I would like to thank Australia's Blue Security Program and, of course, La Trobe University for organizing this project. All right, for the maritime governance priorities and challenges of the Philippines, first, I want to highlight, of course, that the Philippines is an archipelago, meaning it is surrounded by bodies of water, because most news coverage focuses only on the western and northern regions of the Philippines, meaning where the South China Sea lies, including our own West Philippine Sea. But of course, on the eastern side, we have the Pacific Ocean meeting the Philippine Sea, while the Sulu and Celebes Sea lie to the south. So given this, our government actually handles vast waters to govern and manage, including our inland bodies of water. So these are all connected to the seas. So they have their own unique challenges and, of course, various resources and needs that we need to manage to ensure sustainable usage and protection. So as a developing country, the Philippines faces multifaceted maritime governance issues. So this relate to coastal and marine management, tourism, transport, maritime and territorial disputes, and institutional capacities. I want to summarize our maritime governance priorities into 3 points. Okay, first, territorial integrity and sovereignty. Second, sustainability and the blue economy. And third, maritime industry development. The last one is concerning our marine sector, our maritime professionals. So these are all detailed in our national security policy, the Philippine Development Plan, and the Maritime Industry Development Plan, which guide the Philippine government policies. And for our maritime governance challenges in 3 points again. And the first thing that people will think of course, first is maritime security and maritime disputes, particularly in the South China Sea, which is recognized as a primary national interest in the Philippines' national security policy. And second, there are significant shortfalls in maritime domain awareness, with limitations in surveillance capabilities and inadequate maritime assets. So this situation is exacerbated by the government's or the Philippine government's budget constraints, which stalled the acquisition of necessary equipment and technology essential for meeting the country's goal of minimum credible deterrence and establishing a self-reliant defense posture. So, and third, of course, there is a fragmented policy implementation. The National Marine Policy of the Philippines, it was introduced in 1994, but remains stagnant and overly broad, leading to persistent policy gaps. But anyway, recently, just last month, President Marcos signed the Executive Order number 57, reorganizing the National Coast Watch Council into the National Maritime Council. We are expecting more changes in our maritime governance from this step, and hopefully, with the support of different agencies, the approach will be more comprehensive and holistic.
Thank you so much for that one, Ivy. I liked how you emphasized how maritime government's priority can change depending on governments and how they can adapt over time to new challenges. So picking up with you, Ivy, and with ongoing tensions between China and the Philippines in the South China Sea, including what we've seen a rise in grey zone activities, how do you think maritime governance plays a role in this?
All right, as I mentioned earlier, the situation in the bigger area of the South China Sea, and particularly in the West Philippine Sea, is considered a primary national interest in the national security policy of the Philippines. Of course, the area, we all know, it's notable for its abundant fish resources, position as a major trade route, and the potential of its oil and liquefied natural gas reserves. And the Philippine government emphasizes the direct impact on any escalations of tensions on its national interest and the direct impact also to the livelihoods of its citizens. So when we talk about maritime governance, we are talking about the establishment of common rules and effective enforcement of these rules. So in light of the recent incidents in the South China Sea, the Philippines has been progressing in strengthening its rules and its enforcement. So aside from the reorganized new Maritime Council, which I mentioned earlier, the Congress in both houses has recently passed the Maritime Zones Bill. So this bill passage will provide a legal basis for the effective exercise of Filipinos' rights in maritime areas. It will also clarify the geographical extent of maritime domain and clarify the legal power of the Philippines to may exercise over. So why is it important? Of course, in the light of the gray zone activities in the South China Sea, this legal basis emphasizes the Philippines' commitment to defend its rights in its waters and secure international cooperation in the conservation and management of our inter-island and offshore waters. And in addition to this Maritime Zone Bill, there's also on the pipeline a Philippine Coast Guard Modernization Act. So this is to enhance the Coast Guard capabilities, reflecting its frontline role in the disputed waters. So in the latest incidents in the sea, we have seen how the dangerous maneuvers of Chinese vessels have threatened our people and challenge our sovereign rights. So our government, of course, must provide the necessary support to have a responsive and well-equipped Coast Guards with enhanced technical and legal capabilities in maritime safety, security, search and rescue, law enforcement, and environmental protections. And of course, this applies as well to all other maritime agencies, including our Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources and partner organizations in the marine science community. So China's gray zone activities are also, I just want to emphasize this, that they are exacerbating the environmental damage in the South China Sea. So our maritime agencies should be well coordinated, organized, and well equipped to face the gray zone activities as they carry on with their roles in maintaining safety and security in the sea. And of course, like what I've said, they need to secure and make our marine environment and resources sustainable. But well, our President Marcos vows to exhaust all possible mechanisms to address the tension with our neighbors and of course diplomatically. So all our agencies should be ready to respond to whatever it requires.
Thank you so much for that one, Ivy. And turning to Thu now, picking up on discussions about IUU fishing. So I was wondering how Vietnam might draw on existing multilateral frameworks to strengthen regional maritime governments and also to improve key regional issues such as IUU fishing and maritime boundary disputes.
Thanks for the question, Kate. Well, I think multilateral frameworks are without a doubt important for Vietnam and also other countries to govern the marine sectors and also to address the transnational issues. So an example of the multilateral frameworks is ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And I think ASEAN has created several platforms such as the ASEAN Maritime Forum or ASEAN Regional Forum, for the government officials, experts, and also other relevant stakeholders to meet and discuss different maritime issues of common interest. So I think for Vietnam, the country has used the platforms to voice its concern, also to call on the respect for international law, including the 1982 UNCLOS. And for example, Vietnam was the chair of ASEAN in 2020. And during its chairmanship, Vietnam repeatedly stressed the importance of UNCLOS in dealing with the maritime dispute and also maintaining regional peace. So Vietnam and other Southeast Asian nations, I think through ASEAN, also engage in dialogues and practical maritime cooperations with many external partners such as Australia, Japan, China, the US, and the European Union. And Kate, because you were asking about maritime boundary disputes, so I think I would like to mention about the negotiations on the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea, or the COC. I think the main purpose is to reduce the risk of conflict and also to facilitate peaceful resolution of current dispute between ASEAN countries and also China's. And Vietnam, as one of the claimants, has been trying to achieve an early adoption of the COC, and clearly the outcomes of the COC will significantly affect Vietnam as well. However, unfortunately, I think up to the present, the negotiations on the COC have yet been concluded. And this is also the limitations of the multilateral framework, I think, because they tend to be slow moving and also less effective when it's come to conflict mediation. And about the IU fishing, I think is a problem that's taking place in both domestic waters, but also on the high sea as well, and is international in nature. So a countries alone cannot solve the problems, and therefore Vietnam, I think, definitely need to leverage the existing multilateral framework and need to increase communications and cooperation with other countries, but also it's also need to work with regional fishery management organization to better combat the IU fishing. So for those who don't know, actually the regional fishery management organization is very important to deal with the issues of IU fishing, because they can help conduct import but also at sea inspections, and they can also circulate the information about vessels engaged in IU fishing activities to member countries. So I think at present, Vietnam is already cooperating non-members of the Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Committee, and it's also take part in the Ocean and Fishery Working Groups of the APEC. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for that one too. And just a reminder to all of our attendees as well, if you've got any questions, please pop them in the Q&A. So Fikry, you mentioned earlier about Malaysia's relations with China. So how would you, as well as Malaysia's domestic politics, so how do you think domestic issues in Malaysia affect its maritime governance capacity, as well as its relationship with China? Oh, you're just on mute, sorry.
Thanks very much, Kate, for the question. I think it goes both ways. First, in terms of our domestic issues in Malaysia, yeah, I think one of the pressing issues in Malaysia on domestics is on the corruption issues surrounding the LCF saga. So our littoral combat ship issues has been delayed for quite some time, and it involves lots of monies. So it raised the questions of our governance when it comes to our capabilities in enhancing our assets, because of our assets aging, and it needs enhancement. It needs bolsters strategy in terms of bringing our capabilities in patrolling our maritime borders. So it really affecting our maritime governance capacity when it comes to good governance issues, especially when it comes to assets, the procurement. But when it comes to China, I think it's more like yes, in terms of how politicians, especially the government, the prime minister itself, react to Chinese government, because China is our close partners, strong, biggest trading partners for 10 years. And now, I think last year, PM Anwar has been to China 2 times. And during last year, there's some remarks made on China in terms of Malaysia ready to negotiate with China. I think because of our close relations with China, so it invites our, especially politicians, to be more benign with the Chinese, especially on the South China Sea. And that invited criticism and also repercussions from the public. And the politicians from the other side has been using that as a political mileage in impacting overall strategy for our maritime governance. So that's why the overall governance when it comes to Malaysian maritime capabilities is between domestic, that impacting our relations on maritime capacity, and also on how our relations with China is impacting our domestic politics in response to overall China. Because the discussion on China and the South China Sea has been debated quite a lot, not only on social media, but also on parliamentary sittings, and it invites lots of debates surrounding the people. So our foreign policy and also maritime governance has slowly succumbed to public concerns. So overall, our national maritime governance needs to take into consideration our public opinions, not only on China. I think on AUKUS, for example, yeah, when it comes to nuclear powered submarine, I think the people do not understand it is a nuclear powered submarine. So because they think because it's nuclear, it is nuclear, right? So this is depends on the government itself on how domestic elites on explaining to the public what is that. So if the people understand and the government itself understands the priorities on explaining to the people, so it will help our maritime governance capacity to flourish. But it boils down to how we can manage our good governance on the assets, on how we can enhance our interagencies. So by that, it is all interconnected, not only on our relationship with China, because China is already there. So we cannot run away from it. We will continue to partners with China despite our differences, but how we can manage our domestic capabilities when it comes to not only on elites, but also the people itself. Because at the end of the day, it is the voters that are very crucial for the government to survive. So public debates is very important, and firefighting it is very hard for the government to firefighting the issues at the domestic level at the same time to engage with international issues, especially when it comes to assertiveness on Chinese and also on other issues surrounding maritime domains. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for that one. I really liked how you framed maritime governments as this kind of public discourse that the Malaysian government needs to work with the people, as well as looking broader at South China Sea. So Ivy, too, I was wondering if you had any reflections on Vietnam and the Philippines, if there's a kind of connection between the domestic as well as the government when it comes to maritime governance issues and foreign policy.
All right. I think for like we have been observing earlier on the discussions like Malaysia and Vietnam, we have actually a lot of common issues in terms of traditional and non-traditional security issues, and these are overlapping. And well, there are a lot also of opportunities for that in order for us to cooperate. I mean, and I think Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the rest of other Southeast Asian nations, of course, aside from the ASEAN that we have been talking for a long time, and we have also unilateral solutions. We have been talking with Indonesia and Malaysia on the south in the Sulu-Celebes Sea, like what we have mentioned Fikry earlier. We have this piracy, maritime piracy, drug trafficking. It's happening there. I mean, we're not only talking about the South Chinese issue, which is very common and also always in the news, but we do have a lot of common issues that we could actually sit down into. It's in a maritime environment as well, like maritime piracy, drug trafficking, human trafficking, it's there. And both of us, all the countries in Southeast Asia could actually work more on this one and sit down on it.
I definitely agree with Ivy's. So similar for the case of Vietnam as well, I can observe. So apart from the multilateral frameworks, Vietnam has also been cooperative with other countries, bilaterally and also through multilateralism as well. And this kind of mechanism, I think, has been helpful to have Vietnam deal with traditional but also non-traditional issues such as the human trafficking or migrant smuggling at sea, and also other shares issues of common interest between neighboring countries. So yes, I can definitely see the same patterns in Vietnam.
Thank you so much for that one. So zooming out, Ivy, so we've seen under the Biden as well as the Marcos administration, the US and the Philippines have enhanced their relations, and even Australia and the Philippines are continuing to enhance their cooperation as well. How do these more minilateral as well as bilateral defense cooperation, how might that impact regional maritime governments and security?
All right. Okay, like what we have mentioned, and the concern of the rest of the Southeast Asian countries, the maritime domain is a combination of traditional and non-traditional security issues. And in these areas, the implications are, like what I've said earlier, overspilling to our neighboring countries and the greater region, thus of course, requiring continuous cooperation and engagement. The priority areas for international cooperation target a broad spectrum of strategic and environmental objectives. So the enhanced relation, of course, with our long-standing ally, the United States, and our dialogue partners, including Australia. Our primary concern is the need for maritime security and defense cooperation. Of course, this is a bit broad. So as the US and the Philippines beef up their strategic partnership, it includes and continue to expand renewed pledges to work together in addressing pressing and global regional challenges to support a free, safe, and open Indo-Pacific. But it also built on we have and progress on defense relationship and combined exercises with Japan, Australia, and the South China Sea. And we have even scheduled bilateral maritime cooperative activity. So this has been scheduled as well. But there's also continued support for Philippine maritime law enforcement agencies to increase their capacity and capability to counter illegal fishing, improve maritime domain awareness, provide search and rescue support, building in maritime resource governance, conducting marine scientific research, and supporting sustainable natural resources. Also, of course, in our coastal communities and MSMEs, micro and small enterprises, we do have programs for that. So these are just few of the programs with the US, and of course, likewise in Australia, we have ongoing cooperation, includes but not limited to cooperation in humanitarian and disaster response, which is very important in Southeast Asia, especially in the Philippines. Cooperation and support on law enforcement, and like what we have mentioned earlier, human trafficking, illegal drug trafficking, these are happening in the sea. We also talk about blue economy across various sectors such as fisheries, aquaculture, marine transport, high quality infrastructure and development. And of course, we have been talking about this pressing issues of climate change, mitigation, adaptation, renewable energy, regional connectivity, and nature-based solutions for climate outcomes. So, and as I mentioned, the existence of this traditional, especially the non-traditional security issues, one country cannot handle it alone. And these concerns are our neighbors and the region's concerns. So we are expanding our multilateral cooperation with our neighboring countries and our like-minded countries such as Australia, Canada, EU, India, Japan, and others. And of course, we need a whole society, whole government approach, and of course, we need cooperation from our neighbors because this problem is not it's the concern of our neighbors and the region.
Thank you so much for that one, Ivy. And in your remarks there and at the start as well, you also mentioned industry and coastal communities as important to strengthening maritime governments. Maritime governments is quite a holistic approach of how we govern the maritime domain. So the importance of inclusion industries, particularly with things like IUU fishing, human trafficking, as well as climate change are really important. And of course, HADR. So picking up on those points of climate change and human security issues, turning to you two, a lot of your work explores the intersection between climate change, human security, as well as maritime issues. How might maritime governments be employed to combat these issues? And do you think that the regional maritime governments need to be strengthened to combat these new types of multi-regional transboundary issues?
Thanks, Kate, for mentioning my other work. And I in this can see the close link between maritime governance and also climate change and human security issues. So nowadays, I think we all can observe the presence of the sea level rise caused by climate change, or also many human security issues, such as the human trafficking or migrant smuggling, or also piracy at sea as well. I think Ivy and I just mentioned in the previous answers. So I think these kind of issues can pose a threat to the livelihoods of many coastal communities, but also it can negatively affect the prosperity and also the safety of many maritime nations. So on your questions, I think national and also regional maritime governance is definitely important and can be improved to address the issues. So domestically, I think country can try to enhance their capability for climate adaptations And also it can try to have a stronger legal and policy framework to deal with the human security issues. And they can also try to improve their sea patrol capability as well. And regionally, I think countries can try to increase the information sharing and also best practice sharing so that it can inspire many other countries to come up with innovative solutions for these issues. And more advanced country, more developed country can try to provide technical assistance or also technology transfers to less developed countries. And neighboring country can also to accelerate sea patrols or inspections so that they can prevent the transnational maritime crimes that I just mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that one too. And as you mentioned, the kind of whole of region response that is needed for these types of challenges and the support that larger countries such as Australia, the United States can play when it comes to information sharing, things like maritime domain awareness, which we're seeing throughout the region, particularly with the Quad and their IPMDA initiatives in Singapore. So on that topic of the technological side of maritime governments, Fikry, this brings us to you. So you're an expert as well on digital connectivity. And in your paper, you mentioned the importance of science and technology cooperation in maritime governments. I was wondering if you could tell us more about that.
Thanks very much, Kate. I think Thu has mentioned on the climate change. And when it comes to science and technology, I think it's very important for countries like Malaysia and other South Asian region to engage with other key partners like Australia, UK, and the US. Like recent meetings between Malaysia and Australia when PM Anwar went to Australia. So one among the MOU that's been developed is on the critical tech and also cybersecurity. Yeah, it's a great move considering that Malaysia has been has vast interest in the maritime domains on ports, on shippings, and also next move on the submarine cable. So this is one of the areas that countries like Malaysia can look into on the partnerships on the science and technology. Like Thu has mentioned, the information sharings, knowledge transfer, and also R&D. Because I think the partnership should evolve on the research and development on how especially on maritime cybersecurity, on engaging, especially with the emerging challenges, like we had recently, and still there's emerging reports on attempted cybersecurity issues surrounding Malaysia's port management. So this is one of the areas that we need to look into. So by having that kind of engagement, so it can build countries like Malaysia's science and tech resilience and interoperability when it comes to in contending with the challenges on maritime cybersecurity that affecting our critical infrastructure. So with the vast interest on our maritime domains, especially on ports and shipping, so it's very important to engage, not only to engage, but through the MOU and to extend it to something tangible by having like maybe a consortium of a group of experts with the complemented with a high level engagement. So the engagement on science and technology is not on the MOU itself, but it goes beyond with outcomes that helps to maintaining and to advance our interests on maritime domains, especially on the maritime cybersecurity. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much for that one, Fikry, particularly shining on the light of one of the kind of lesser discussed issues of maritime security and maritime governments in terms of cyber resilience. You also mentioned the importance of cyber safe ports as well as shipping. And we've got a Blue Security Fellow, Thu Nguyen Hoang Anh, who's based in Malaysia, that's working quite a bit on cyber resilience in regards to the maritime domain. So we're looking forward to seeing more work from you, Fikry, as well as our colleague Thu Nguyen Hoang Anh on how we can strengthen cyber resilience in the maritime domain. So I've got one final question for each of you before we'll turn over to the Q&A. So just a reminder, if you've got any questions, to pop them in the Q&A. So we've looked here at security and non-traditional securities of maritime governments, but another key part of maritime governments is of course domestic as well as international law. So I was wondering if you could each reflect on the relationship between law and maritime governments, or if you've got any specific examples of where these two issues interplay.
Hello? Yeah. Okay. That's good. I think for Malaysia, I think we always been upholding the UNCLOS 1982, and also lots of legal instrument has been used by Malaysia in order to spearheading our maritime disputes, like I mentioned before, Sipadan Legitan 2002, and also Pedra Branca, but we lost. But it is an attempt, and an attempt for us to gain our influence on the maritime domains. But overall, when it comes to law and maritime governance, we have been using an UNCLOS, and each country has been interpreting UNCLOS according to their own, and that's why we're having like 9-line, and for Malaysia, UNCLOS and other laws and other regulation has always been a main priorities for our maritime governance. So we always played by that, and that's why I think our approach when it comes to any issues surrounding South China Sea, we try to be a low profile, but we have been using that kind of a legal instrument as part of our approach, as compared to, I think, the Philippines have a different approach, Vietnam has a different approach. But for us, law and when it comes to law, the UNCLOS, it is our main priority when it comes to that, and it really helps because of our relationship with China. For example, we have ambivalent relations, so we having a bold stand is not an option for us, because we will have a repercussions and repercussion in any other areas, and repercussion is not good, especially on our economy. So that's why sticking true with the UNCLOS, and also possibly next on the COC negotiation is one of the way that we can keep the options open, and in order to perhaps enable our relationship with China, but also try to appease the publics, because otherwise it is an uphill battle for us to engage with the publics and also with the international issues. Yeah.
And I can definitely observe the same patterns in Vietnam, like Malaysia's, that Fikry just mentions. So I think for Vietnam, the stance has always been like respecting the international laws, especially the 1982 UNCLOS. So it's played a very important role for maritime governance, because Vietnam, based on the UNCLOS, to develop its own domestic laws on a lot of maritime issues. And also Vietnam used this international maritime law to deal with a lot of dispute and conflicts over maritime issue as well. So as I already mentioned in my previous answers, so Vietnam during the chairmanships of ASEAN, and also during a lot of meetings within ASEAN, but also within the UNs and with other countries, they always mentions about the importance of international laws and how we all should respect for that. But of course, it's not without limitations. So I think Fikry also touched upon this. That is, a lot of countries have different interpretations of UNCLOS and also international maritime law. So this in turn can lead to confusions and also dispute, conflict over a lot of countries. So yeah, this is my take on this issue. Thank you.
All right, Lou. So as for the Philippines, okay, I think like any other ASEAN country, we all agree that we need to adhere with the UNCLOS. And yeah, of course, the Philippines is upholding on this one and the international law. And of course, aside from this one, I think that there are a lot of other tools and mechanisms, international agreements as well, that we are not so much maximizing. I mean, Southeast Asian countries and the rest of all other countries, we have signed different conventions, agreements, and this all concerns different aspects of the maritime environment. And I guess, well, for the Philippines, it's not in the news, but there are different partnerships in different international organizations, regional and also organizations under the UN in terms of coastal management resources, in terms of marine scientific research and other things. So I think these are the things that we also need to maximize and also promote in terms of other issues in the maritime governance or in the maritime domain. But yeah, of course, the Philippines is, of course, coordinating international, national, and local. I mean, like I've mentioned, we have always saying a whole government and whole society approach. But of course, there are a lot of gaps on that. Capabilities are also, there are a lot of loopholes that we need to also answer and address, but of course we are trying our best to cooperate on different areas and different levels of the society, because it's really complex and complicated.
Definitely very complex and complicated. And to give you guys harder questions, so we've got a couple of questions in the chat about the code of conduct in the South China Seas. So the first is from Blue Security Program Manager and Research Fellow at the UWA Defence and Security Institute's Troy Lee Brown. So he says issues of sovereignty and disputes over maritime boundaries affect many Southeast Asian maritime states. How can the impasse of the code of conduct in the South China Sea be overcome in the short term, or is there another avenue to resolve South China Sea issues by Southeast Asian states if needed? And we also have a question here from Maria Loda Surloko, who's the Consul General of the Philippines here in Melbourne. So she says that more than 10 years have passed since the Code of Conduct discussions and it's not yet to be finalised. What are the practical solutions for each of the party, and what are your suggestions for those practical solutions? So open to any of the three of you to answer first.
All right, maybe I can go first. So yeah, I'll just connect the questions, but anyway, they are all connected. Anyway, so how can the imposition of the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea can be overcome in short term? It's actually complicated right now, as we know that, especially on the Philippine side, the tensions is so high. Of course, I think all the parties should calm down first and manage these tensions and high tensions in the sea. But of course, like what we all have said, if there's miscommunication in all the parties or the opposing parties, there's more reason for us to communicate. So if there's miscommunication, there's more reason for us to communicate and sit down. And of course, it's very unfortunate that that there's an impasse on the ASEAN COC. But of course, at the end of the day, whatever it happens, all the ASEAN countries, and especially those parties on dispute, should sit down and negotiate. And ASEAN is one of the forum that we could use. But aside from this, I think it should not be the parties as well that are concerned should not neglect other areas that we could actually work on, because there are a lot of underlying problems. The problems about disputes of the territory, the sovereignty, the 9-dash line, it may go on for decades, generations, and some will say they just want to shelve the dispute. But there are other problems that we actually need to sit down with the ASEAN, with the conflicting parties. We need to sit down about the worsening environment. I mean, there are a lot of studies there out of the marine scientist community. CSIS have released one that the marine environment is actually degrading. I mean, it's worsening. The fisheries resources, the coral reefs, the conditions are going bad. And of course, there are also, as well as natural resources, liquefied gas or oil that potentially are there. And all of us here, all the parties on this have problem with energy. You have problems with energy and food security. So again, the problems of the dispute, of course, we need to talk. But aside from that, it's not the only problem. So we need to work parallel with all other problems underlying this. And of course, this could actually even help in confidence building measures. This could actually help on strengthening and gaining trust, because there's really high mistrust between all the parties. You say this, the other one say this, and everyone is saying that we are concerned with the South China Sea and the environment. But how are we going to move on? The defense, the security, the military, the island building, they keep on building it. And the military weapons and the rest of the other things are keep on beefing up. But how about the other areas that are worsening? So we should also address on this one. So I think, like, yeah. So aside from that, like what the questions also here that which do you think deserve priority for attention with all these ongoing things that is happening? I'm into right now into environmental peace building. because I think that there's really high mistrust between the parties, and there are low-hanging fruits that we keep on saying. So at the same time, I think, of course, we just don't need to just shut down the talks about the disputes and all those things happening on the sea. But at the same time, we have a lot of departments in the government, we have a lot of institutions, we have a lot of agreements. Those things should not also stop when there are tensions on the sea. So there should be some mechanism so that all other measures should be still ongoing. We have a lot of MOU on different aspects, but if there's a high tension on the South China Sea, everything stops. I mean, it should not be like that. So I think we should keep on talking. Like what I've said, if there's miscommunication, there are more rooms for communication. Maybe I have missed some things on the questions, but I will answer later on. Maybe Fikry and Thu could add more on and give their insights. Yeah.
I think Ivy has provided relatively comprehensive answers. For me, maybe I think we all are not surprised anymore why the COC has been slow moving, because this is a negotiation between China and ASEAN, and these are so many countries with diverging interests, and also they have different priorities as well. So it's going to be very hard for them to reach a conclusions anytime soon. But my belief is that in the long term, we still keep our trust in international law and uphold this kind of UNCLOS and also other type of international agreement to continue the negotiations. But in the short term, maybe I think the solution that Ivy mentioned, and I also believe that we can talk about issues of shared common interest, for example, the maritime plastic pollutions or the depletions of fisheries, or also other humanitarian or disaster management issue as well. These issues faced by a lot of countries in the regions, and they can definitely find a mechanism to work with each others. While the negotiation is still going on, they can try to work on this issue first, because it can potentially threaten the livelihoods of many people. So they can certainly, I think, bilaterally or maybe work in a smaller group compared to ASEAN to deal with this issue. And hopefully this can increase trust, but also confidence among countries in the dispute. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Thu and Ivy. I think I just want to add, I think for me, the COC is only a process. So it's been 10 years, and it's just a process for the combination to be open. And I don't think that when Malaysia become the chairmanship next year, it will resolve. But when it comes to the COC, so it's a good efforts on that. But we can see that we have UNCLOS 1982, and there's some arbitration rules that has been resulted in some, for example, the Philippines arbitrations, and also Malaysia's arbitrations with Sipadan Ligita and Piedra Branca. But some countries respected that, but some countries don't. So I'm not sure that how can the COC will provide the same when the other countries did not respect whatever we had now on international on UNCLOS, and let's say if COC was tabled, and it is up to the countries that respected what they're supposed to, like UNCLOS. But then I think on how we can moving forward from the dispute is that we can use bilateral and also unilateral. Bilateral, for example, Malaysia, Thailand, we have JDA, Joint Development, that we had now is still ongoing until today. And then we got, I think there are some discussions, like discrete discussion on, I think, Louisa Reef, that is slowly between Malaysia and Brunei. So this is, we can use bilateral communication when it comes to the South China Sea in order for us to ease the tension. But I think some other countries will be using, like, for example, like a 9 and 10 dash line, that, for example, the recent 10 dash line that includes Sarawak, that not making any sense. So that's why I think we can rely on the bilateral cooperation, but it still depends on the country itself on either they can agree to that, because when the COC, I think, has mentioned, countries have diverging interests, and it's not easy for 10 countries, including China, to come into the position. Not even 10 countries, even the climate state itself, we are having a different issues that I think that's why I think using bilateral and unilateral channel is one of the key areas in in order for us rather to rely on the COC, because COC will continue. I believe it will continue maybe another year to come. But bilateral and unilateral is one. So it's a great way forward for us in order to have some agreement on dispute especially in the South China Sea. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. And that brings us to the conclusion. Apologies if we didn't get to your question. It was a really thorough and extensive conversation. So thank you everyone for joining us this morning. A recording of this webinar will be available on YouTube at some point today, depending on how long YouTube loads. Thank you to our fantastic speakers, Fikry, Ivy, and Thu, for joining us this morning. And Blue Security would also like to extend our thank you to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Australia for its ongoing support, as well as our consortium members, Trobe Asia, Griffith Asia Institute, the University of New South Wales Canberra, the University of Western Australia's Defence and Security Institute, the United States Study Centre at the University of Sydney, as well as the Asia-Pacific Development, Diplomacy and Defence Dialogue. To stay updated with Blue Security, you can follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and sign up to our newsletter. Thank you so much for attending, everyone, and have a great day.